If a majority of Scots are more likely to vote for candidates that stand up for fishing, can you set out what your party will do to support Scotland's fishing fleet? So, any takers, or should I just pick somebody?
I can.
Yeah?
Yeah. I think one of the things I've been saying from the offset, anytime fishing comes up at committee or in the chamber, is that Scottish Greens absolutely want to see sustainable wild fisheries for the next 100 years, for 1,000 years. For as long as there are human beings on the planet, we absolutely have to have a sustainable wild fisheries. How we get there is maybe different. There are maybe differing views on that. Something that I have constantly raised with the government, different cabinet secretaries, Mary Goujon and also Mary McCallum when she was in a relevant role, was the issue around spatial planning. We absolutely need to get that spatial aspect of where do fisheries go, where is offshore wind appropriate, and really listen to fishers. There's traditional fishing grounds that people have used for generations, and that absolutely needs to be respected. And I also recognize that we need to get those, I think, very successfully agreed marine, the management plans, the MPA areas. We need to get that agreed and sorted out. They've been paper parched for a long time, and it's fantastic that the sector wants to and has supported that coming about. But absolutely, the spatial planning and mapping out so that we understand where there is actually a real spaces for putting fishing and renewables has to be thought out carefully. Otherwise, we won't have that sustainable wild fishery. And I really want to see Scottish people. I know a lot of our fisheries gets exported, but I want to see a resilient food system in Scotland, and a big part of that needs to be our wild fish.
We need almost a map of the seas to see where the fishing grounds are, where we could develop renewables, where we put fish farms, things like that. At the moment, it just seems to be a free-for-all, and the first in gets whatever they want, and then other people are being pushed out. So we have to protect the fishing industry for the reasons I guess Ariane said, but we need a source of food. Fish is healthy, and we also need the economic benefit that comes from fishing. So we have to make sure that we protect all our industries. I'm not against offshore renewables, but we should never be in the position where we're pitting one against another. We should have done that planning long ago. We also need to have proper science that involves the fishing industry as well as the scientists. At the moment, it's almost like you're lining up the fishing industry on one side, scientists on the other, and they don't meet. Whereas if they actually shared information and worked together, I think we would have much better science, and then we would stop this kind of quota, kind of start-stop thing that not only impacts on the fishing industry itself, it impacts on the onshore industry as well. So we should be working hand in hand. We need to protect fishing because it's in all our interests, but we also need to develop renewables. But they shouldn't be either or. We should be able to do both.
Yeah, from SNP.
So kind of similar, in my conversation with the Cabinet Secretary yesterday ahead of coming here today, we talked about energy security, we talked about food security, we talked about sustainable fishing. Spatial squeeze is something that we hear about at committee when we take evidence as well, and that's something that's really, really important. So there needs to be a balance of supporting fishing to be sustainable. There needs to be a balance of energy security as well. But I really think that the marine plan that's in process of being developed will help to look at how we collaborate together, how we support research, evidence, science, and make sure that we support fishing to be sustainable. And the word just transition comes up a lot when we talk about other energy sectors or other sectors as well, and that's something that the SNP government is committed to doing, to make sure that collaboration, engagement, working together with our fishers is absolutely key as we move forward to support fishing in Scotland.
With the sector, just from the question, it's hinting that there is already conflict. It's not a sort of theoretical situation. So you're able to kind of address the fact that it is already a conflict between those two factors.
Well, if I haven't read the article this morning yet. If there's the conflict needs to be engaged with and managed and working together and hearing from the experts as well is what absolutely needs to be done. We know the challenges of supporting our rural communities. We need to make sure we support the industry, and we also have to make sure that we can take forward our energy security as well in the future.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of tensions in using the marine space, but you'd be surprised to hear from a Shetlander that she doesn't support the fishing industry. Of course I do, absolutely wholeheartedly. It's the essence of it's the backbone of what Shetland is, and we contribute significantly to the Scottish economy. In terms of spatial squeeze, though, this has been going on for so long, and nobody has really paid any attention to what's been happening. It's a combination of things. We've got connectivity issues. We've got cables that get cut every now and again, and we lose telecommunications. We've got obviously the renewables. We've got tensions within the aquaculture, and it is always, as I've heard members from the fishing organisations say, it's always the fishermen that have to take the mitigations. So I think there's much more that needs to be done in the future in terms of that. But we must have a sustainable future, and the people who want that most, I understand, for obvious reasons, are the fishermen, because it's their business, it's their livelihood, that's what matters.
Good morning, everybody. Morning, Catherine. And yeah, delighted to see. But it's one of these things. You read the polls in the paper that 66% of Scots want to ensure that we back fishing over becoming a casualty of offshore wind development. But we can't see fishing being a collateral damage to the race to have renewables. Energy comes in two formats: energy in terms of electricity, but energy in terms of food as well. And fishing in Scotland is incredibly important. 60% of the UK's catch is in Scottish waters. It creates thousands of jobs. It is incredibly important for our economy, but vital to food security. So absolutely, the Scottish Conservatives have always stood up for fishermen. Unlike our empty seat at the end here, the Reform can't even come and sit at the table. I don't know how they can possibly suggest that they're going to stand up for the fishing industry. But we were happy to sign the pledge, which will ensure that there's a moratorium on further offshore development until that spatial squeeze is addressed, because it is real and it is happening. We're seeing our fishermen having to fish in ever smaller areas of our sea, and it's all very well, and I'm not going to be too critical, I want to be positive about the industry, but it's all very well the Greens and the SNP talking about them being aware of this, but it's not that long since we had the Butte House Agreement that would have seen an arbitrary percentage of Scotland's seas turned into HPMAs, which would effectively stopped any sort of fishing that was out without any scientific basis, just a figure plucked out there, and thank goodness we saw that ripped up in a more pragmatic approach taken to fishing.
Actually, yeah, just on that point, before we move on to other questions, maybe one for you, Emma. Obviously, the HPMA policies, that the proposals were, that was 2023, I think, if I'm right in saying, when that was all kind of thrown out, and I wondered, I seem to remember reporting sort of the last stage was that ministers were going back to the drawing board, and I wondered if there's any, what's your party learnt from that? Because obviously with coastal communities that was really disappointing with how things were handled.
I mean, it's, I think the challenge is that we, I guess the HPMA, the government, I'm not the government, but the government has learned from that. I think we do need to think about how do we support fishing industry with the spatial challenges, marine protected areas, issues where now there's cable corridors being created, things that, in working together and listening to the industry and collaborating is how the government will work with the fishing experts to look at how we can manage it all in a way that supports industry, supports the fishing businesses as well, and our coastal communities. So, you know, we talk about depopulation and repopulation in our rural areas, and fishing needs to be supported in order to keep people in our rural areas. So it's something that I'm sure the government have learned from in order to support, you know, taking our issues forward, taking industry forward. But again, it goes back to supporting food security, sustainable fishing, and you know, working with our rural partners.
Yeah,
Being the other part of that. Internationally, highly protected marine areas have actually been really successful. However, within Scotland, I think it was too early a thing to introduce, given this, what we've just been talking about, the spatial squeeze. We will, if we want that sustainable fisheries to happen for future generations, we absolutely have to look at how do we protect the spawning grounds, how do we protect the starting of what makes fishing possible. And that has scientifically been shown to be an ecosystems approach. So we've got marine protected areas, and what they do is, probably everyone here knows, is that they protect very specific features in our seas. And the challenge with that is that those features can move or disappear or change, whatever. But what we really need to be looking at is areas where we are saying we're going to look at the whole ecosystem. We're going to look at all of the species in that space, and we're going to really allow that to flourish. And that has been, we have some areas around Scotland where it's shown that if we allow ecosystems recovery, so everything in that area to recover and be healthy and fully the kind of full feature of that, we get what's called a spillover effect, or maybe it's an overspill effect, but anyway, that term. And fishers are finding that around the edges of those protected ecosystems, there's actually more abundance. So we really need to, if we want that long-term wild sustainable fisheries, we really need to get together. And I, after the HPMAs, I met with a fisher who was kind of leading on the HPMA, no, we don't want it. Because I think the way the consultation was brought out was very confusing. It was poorly conveyed, and actually the government needed to go to the communities and talk to people. And I think that's really what needs to happen. And I went to Tiree and I was talking to a fisherman there, a creeler, and he said, I want to see fishermen, politicians, and scientists around the table together. So that's something that I think we need to see in the next session, is people coming together and having that conversation. How do we actually make sure there's a fisheries? I mean, I'm just talking about the fish stocks, but there's a whole lot of other things that are pressure on the industry. One of them is secession. I'm meeting skippers who go, I've got a vessel, but I don't have a younger person coming up behind me to take it on. So politicians, scientists, and fishers around the table, and all fishers from all sectors, because we can say fishing, but as again we all know, there's many different fishers: creelers, trawlers, dredgers, even divers. Right? There's many different forms of fisheries, and we need to come together and actually say, how are we going to protect all of the different fisheries? How are we going to manage spatial gear conflict and those things? We really need to have those conversations.
It really caused a huge amount of disquiet because it was being done to people rather than with them. And you know, when you speak to the fishing community, there is no industry that is more invested in the well-being of our seas, because people, the fishing industry, need the seas to be good, they need the spawning grounds, they need all of those things to happen. But you know, when we were looking at what was being proposed, it made no sense to anybody at all. So of course people are seeing their industry being impacted, their livelihoods being impacted for nothing that makes any sense. And I hope the government has learned from that. Certainly the MPA management, the offshore one, I think was done alongside the Federation, and I think that worked better. But when we go to the inshore MPAs, that's going to be more difficult, because kind of small one-man bands aren't always part of the Federation. They don't join up, they just get on with their business. So government has to reach out to those people individually and work with them and find out where the areas that need to be protected are and what the measures that they need to take. So it has to be done with people. If it's done to people, nobody's going to accept it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's been awareness that it wasn't handled in the best way because of that.
That's putting it mildly.
My understanding is that the Scottish Fishermen's Federation and the offshore industry and Gillian Martin, the Net Zero CAPSEC, and Marie Goujon have met recently already, so they're not waiting until the next session in order to engage and collaborate and talk about actions that need to be taken going forward. That's already happening.
The problem is, Catherine, we saw Scotland sell off the seabed without any proper consultation, without any assessment of the impact on the fishing industry. So it's all very well Emma Harper saying, oh, we're about to talk, in the next session of Parliament we're going to talk, but they've already sold the seabed to renewables with little consultation with industry. And I pick up Ariane, she said, effectively said the problems with HPMAs were they were poorly conveyed. Well, that suggests that they were just being told what was going to happen. And that was the problem. And I don't think we've moved away. Rhoda touched on the balanced offshore MPA model. That was after a consultation. The government was going to take one approach, and then the industry told them it wasn't the right approach, and they did change. So we do have a more balanced offshore approach to MPAs, and that needs to be applied to inshore. But at the moment, there's little sight of that actually happening. But it's all very well saying, yeah, we'll do it differently. But we've already seen ScotWind seen the seabed sold off without any consideration of the impact and spatial squeeze. So it's more of the same, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, one more, and then I think we'll move on to the audience.
Well, I was just going to say we can't have top-down management and a one-size-fits-all approach, which is what we've seen before. So there has to be co-management, and fishermen have to be in there right at the centre of it.
Yeah.